2021 virtual Southeast Regional Fruit and Vegetable Grower Conference. My name is Jeff Cook. I'm the county agent in Taylor and Peach counties in middle Georgia, and I'm also the area peach agent for the state. A few housekeeping items, and I'm going to run through this pretty quick to give Dario as much time as possible because I'm sure y'all have heard this plenty of times by now. But pesticide CEUs pesticide CEU and CCA credits are available for most of these live presentations. They're only available to registered attendees. They're only available for live, and they're not available when you come back and view these things again, these presentations again, which are all available up until April 30th. To do the necessary steps to get your credits, you go to the event resources tab, and find the pesticide CEU registration form, fill that out one time, you get that done. Once you get that done, when you view a presentation, go to the audience chat box. That's the only box that'll count. Go to the audience chat box, type your first name, your last name, and the state for which you need credit. Do that again at the end of the talk, and that will be proof that you were there, that you actually listened, and you heard the whole thing. Most of these are pre-recorded. This is not. We will do questions and answers when we finish at the end of the talk. Be sure to visit the virtual trade show and the featured product pavilion. And you got one last chance for evening reception and networking, which begins at 5 tonight. And they'll be doing some special stuff for the 25th anniversary of the Georgia Fruit and Vegetable Growers Association, and they'll be passing the gavel on to the next president. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Dario Chavez, who is a professor of horticulture at the University of Georgia. He's the peach horticulture specialist, and he's going to talk about the evaluation of peach rootstock survival, productivity, and planting density in Georgia. Dario?
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Just to confirm, can you see my presentation?
I do not right this second. It doesn't matter because it's live. I can't. I'm not in the live thing. Go ahead.
Okay. So the title of my presentation is Evaluation of Peach Rootstock Survival, Productivity, and Planting Density in Georgia. And this is a work in collaboration with Dr. Todd Megvan. This basically was started because we wanted to evaluate current rootstocks that are available in comparison with basically new rootstocks that are coming up in the market. The first thing that I wanted to talk about is a little bit of history. Rootstocks are important for fruit production, as all of us know, because they basically provide the required protection for present pathogens. In addition, everybody knows that Guardian rootstock is the standard in the southeastern U.S., in Alabama, Georgia, and South Carolina. Guardian was released in 1993, and it was mainly released because of the issues with peach tree short life, resistant to Melodogina javanica and incognita, which were the biggest problems at the time. So it was a key release due to the losses caused at the time due to peach tree short life. Now, when you talk about the current situation, Guardian is highly susceptible to armillaria root rot, and it's susceptible to Melodogina floridensis that has been recently reported in South Carolina and is present in Florida. So after peach tree short life losses were addressed by using Guardian, the armillaria root rot losses started to increase. And armillaria root rot losses pretty much have become the main issue with peach production in the southeastern U.S. currently now. It is so important that even about year 5, you can actually have about 50% of losses and establish basically highly infested soils. So the rootstocks in southeastern U.S., you probably have seen this table before. Normally we classify them by the characteristics that they have related to nematode tolerance, peach tree short life tolerance, root knot resistance, and oak root rot resistance. Let's just focus on oak root rot at the right side of the table. You can see that the majority of the rootstocks are actually highly susceptible. MP29 and sharp are actually the only ones resistant. Now, in the case of sharp, if you are familiar with the story, it was released, but later on it was realized that the fruit size had some issues in comparison with controls or normal commercial rootstocks available. MP29 was basically released a few years back, and as you see, it has actually really nice characteristics for the southeastern US production. Now, there is also new rootstocks that are being developed for the southeastern US and the USDA program. So the new rootstocks that we're talking about, for example, MP29, was released in 2011 and is actually resistant to peach tree short life, the nematodes, as before, including floridensis and armillaria root rot. Now, another thing that happened with MP29 is actually resulted in a remarkable reduction in vigor compared with peach seedlings, and what normally we started stating as a semi-dwarf rootstock, and also reduced suckering. Now, the USDA has few advanced selections considered for release, and that's what we were basically interested in trying to get some data out. P22, and this is a release that basically Tom is considering, is tentatively approved for release by the USDA, and the release is standing up until approval by collaborators, and the nut seed is available for propagation for the nurseries. P22 is a peach seedling rootstock, combining the best qualities of peach tree short life resistant to Melogenaria floridensis as well, a slightly reduced vigor than Guardian and low suckering. In addition, P22 has a level of resistance to armillaria root rot, which falls midway between MP29 and Guardian survival in armillaria root rot infested soils. What it means is basically, if you think about MP29 being 100% alive, and let's say Guardian being let's say in 50%, P22 would be 75%. So it's always falling in the middle between the two. The objective was to evaluate current and upcoming rootstocks for culture characteristics, including survival, plant characteristics, and productivity. So what we did is we established a trial to study plant growth, productivity, and establishment in 2016 in Griffin, Georgia. And what we did is we decided to go with 3 different scions representing early, mid, and late season cultivars. In this case, were Flavor Rich, July Prince, and Alberta. And then we used 4 rootstocks, Guardian as a standard, MP29, P22, and P47. I didn't mention anything about P47. It's actually another selection from Tom Beckman that he was considering to release, but he decided not to due to certain issues. I can mention a little bit more about that, but Tom probably would be the best person to mention some of that. So what we did is we established basically 3 different blocks, and each block basically represented a scion variety, and then we randomized the rootstocks within that. The spacing that we were using is 20 feet by 15. So the field plot basically looked like this. We had a flavor-rich scion variety block where with the rootstocks were basically randomized, and we had 3 different blocks. And the same thing for July Prince and the same thing for Alberta. And these were in the same location, basically. The various measure was survival, suckers, plant growth, trunk diameter, trunk cross-sectional area, canopy width, within and across the row, and canopy volume, yield and yield efficiency, fruit, basically we were looking at percent blush, fruit weight, fruit perimeter, fruit quality, breaks and tetrable acidity. And we started now basically looking at leaf nutrient analysis since this year, basically, the past year, looking at a mature orchard now. The variables that I'm going to talk and present today is pretty much just plant growth, yield, and yield efficiency, and fruit information. Plant growth. Scion cultivars grow differently from each other. Basically, when you compare Alberta versus July Prince versus Flavor Rich, they behave completely different in all of the years that we evaluated currently. Hereafter, basically, we decided to carry the analysis within each scion and year as needed. So the way that we are going to present is basically we're going to divide scions, and then we are going to divide years. So here is the measurement of trunk cross-sectional area. What we do is basically we measure from the soil level to the top 15 centimeters, and then we measure the diameter of the trunk within the row and across the row, and basically we get a value of that. So this is what we use to determine trunk cross-sectional area. Basically is the area within this trunk if you calculate basically the circle area, and it's represented by centimeters squared. It's a good representation of growth. So the interesting thing about this graph is that, as you see in the x-axis, you have year and rootstock, and you can see that you have 16, 17, 18, and 19. And within 16, you have Guardian, MP29, P22, and P47. And it's the same thing across the years. And then in the y-axis, you have basically the trunk cross-sectional area at the left side. And then we have the different scion varieties on the right side. The first thing that pops out as represented by the letters of the mean separation is that the red bar represents MP29 across the years. And you can see how basically MP29 is reduced size from trunk cross-sectional area compared with all the peach seedlings. And it's about basically 50% and even sometimes even more. Now, there were no significant differences when they were planted, which represents that the plants actually were quite similar. But overall, MP29 was significantly smaller. If you start looking at plant growth, in this case of canopy, I was doing measurements of the canopy width within a row and across the row. The idea basically was to establish when plants will touch within a row and also how we will be controlling that. The graph is set up in the same way as trunk cross-sectional area, where you have years and rootstocks on the x-axis and the width average for the plant size, basically canopy, width in the case of the y-axis. So in the top, we have Alberta variety, which is interesting is, what is interesting is basically we have, you can see that MP29 basically is smaller for 16, 17, and 18. And in the case of the 19, basically is not significantly different than the other rootstocks. Now, in the case of flavor rich, you can see that basically MP29 is significantly smaller as well in 2017 and 2019. In the case of July Prince, consistently MP29 basically was smaller for all the years. And why I thought that this was important is basically because I think so that this will be important for determining the planting space and possibly increasing yield per acre. So if you look at this graph in the left side, this was basically in 2019. You have on the left side flavor rich with MP29. This is a border plant. And then you have on the right side flavor rich with Guardian, quite a difference. Why I'm using this as a representation is basically it is important to determine the optimal spacing for canopy width. We are trying to efficiently fill the space and basically harbor as much light that we can, and also basically increase our yield production. So if you see at the average width for year 3, MP29 had about 9.8 feet of width of canopy. Guardian had 12, P22 12, and P47 12 feet. Now, when you look at year 4, you have a MP29 basically 12 feet, Guardian 14, P22 14, and P47 about 14, 15 feet. Now, in the case of canopy volume, what I did is basically I kind of determined a volume unit using the canopy width and also the height of the plant. So it's basically the same representation. In this case, it's just a cubed representation of the volume, a three-dimensional representation of the canopy. You can see that across the years, in 2016, we really didn't see differences for all the science. But starting from 2017, you can see that basically MP29 was smaller than Guardian, P22, and P47. And another thing that's important is that P22 actually behaves quite similar to Guardian. It's basically the release that is being considered basically by the USDA. Now, something interesting that you probably have noticed as you know, all the varieties in your production systems, Alberta consistently actually had about half the canopy volume independently of the rootstock use in comparison to Flavor Rich and July Prince. So we have to consider that in comparison to what are the recommendations that we will be doing, depending on basically not just the rootstock, but also the scion being used. So for example, if I was using Alberta, I probably recommend a higher density than other scions in the case of Flavor Rich of July Prince, for example. Now, in the case of yield, first I'm going to present just Alberta and Flavor Rich yield. And this is yield per tree, and it's in pounds. And then we have here 2018, 19, and 2020. And what is interesting about this information is basically we didn't really see significant differences basically statistically, but you can see that some of the different rootstocks basically jump around. Some of them can be actually high, some can be low, and there was really no statistical difference as I mentioned before. Yield basically was variable across scions and cultivars and rootstocks. Now, I left the July Prince on the side because July Prince, as you all know, is a very consistent variety and yields consistently as well. And so I was interested to basically just look at this variety. As you can see, I have yield from 18, 19, and 2020. And from 18, we were averaging basically a yield production about 10 to 20 pounds per tree. And then remember, this orchard was planted in 2016, so this is basically year 3. And 19, we were about 80 to 90 pounds per tree. And last year, we were basically from 160 to 200 pounds per tree, basically. What is interesting is that we really didn't see significant differences for 18 or 2020. But we did see some statistical differences for 19, where MP29 actually was lower than P47, but statistically no different than Guardian and P22. Overall yield was variable again across rootstocks in the years evaluated. Now, one thing that I wanted to check too is yield efficiency. Yield efficiency, basically what it represents is a measurement of how much fruit can be produced in a unit of area. And in this case, we use basically the trunk cross-sectional area that we determined before, meaning that if you have a smaller tree, can you produce more yield and can you fill more trees in an acre? So in the y-axis, we have the yield efficiency as kilograms per centimeter square, and we have Alberta and Flavor-Rich varieties here. You can see that MP29 actually was quite high comparison with the different other rootstocks, but it was not statistically significant, only in Alberta for 2020. Now, I separated July Prince again because, you know, with the consistent yield that I was obtaining with July Prince, I thought that the comparisons would be more fair in the case of seeing yield efficiency. So yield efficiency in the case of July Prince for 18, 19, and 20, consistently MP29 basically was the highest yield efficiency in comparison with the peach seedlings. What does that mean? It basically means that we can go again back to what is basically looking at the spacing of the different rootstocks. And I will talk a little bit more about that later on. Now, an important measurement that we want to know is also fruit weight, the average fruit weight. We have basically a weight in grams, and we have 18, 19, and 20 for the different scion varieties. And you can see that basically fruit weight was like before, in some occasions would be significantly lower for example, MP29 in Flavor Rich for 19 and 20. But in the 20, for example, it was not statistically different than the peach seedlings. Now you can see that in LIVEQA, actually fruit weight for MP29 was higher. In the case of July prints, we really didn't see any differences, and which I will be more compelled to actually kind of use that information because fruit yielding in July prints is highly representative. Now, in the case of fruit size, and this is just basically uses a perimeter, a ring in inches, you can see that all of them basically were about almost 2.5 to 3 inches of diameter, which is actually a pretty good sized fruit, independently of the year and also the rootstocks use. The take-home points. MP29 rootstock produces smaller sized trees than Guardian, P22, and P47. Now, P22 actually was very comparable with Guardian and P47, which is what basically Dr. Beckman had stated with these ones. The yield per tree was comparable across rootstocks, although variable across years, and we believe that this is more like an environmental effect. The yield efficiency of MP29 was higher than Guardian, P22, and P47 rootstocks, especially for high yield and cultivar July prints, which is very, very compelling to us. Now, why I bring back that yield efficiency and the plant size information is because, think about basically establishing an orchard with a semi-dwarf rootstock. You have at the left side flavor rich with MP29, and the right side flavor rich with Guardian. Flavor rich with them in general is a variety that ripens in early May. And what it does is basically as soon as you remove the fruit, the plant just grows like crazy. Which was interesting for me is that MP29 was actually able to keep that plant kind of back on that. And it was interesting also because it may represent also a reduction of labor for pruning and other management techniques. We haven't really measured pruning efficiency on the different rootstocks, but I think that it's something that it should be actually taken into account in the future. Now, let's talk about planting density. Let's say that we're looking at the field space within a row at year 4, and just using the data that we had. So MP29, let's say you're going to use a 12 feet space between trees and a total of 182 trees per acre. And then Guardian, P22, and P47, just using my measurements from canopy, let's say 15 feet between trees to about 145 trees per acre. So I'm going to use in a hypothetical scenario the average yield basically for year 4 per tree. So, for example, in Flavor Rich, we had 8.9 pounds per tree. For July Prince, it was 179 pounds per tree, and Alberta was 77 pounds per tree. So if we're using a planting density of 20 by 15, we will have a total yield per acre of 1,200 pounds for Flavor Rich, 26,000 pounds for July Prince, and 11,000 pounds of Alberta. Now we change the planting density using MP29, and this is where the yield efficiency comes into place. Flavor Rich would produce 1,600 pounds, July Prince 32,000 pounds, and Alberta 14,000 pounds. So this is why I think so it's important to actually consider certain rootstocks in the case of MP29 as basically more efficient as well, and maybe changing the planting density as all of us have been seeing with MP29. So the conclusions, MP29 rootstock can allow higher planting density and higher yields per acre in comparison to standard peach rootstocks. P22 rootstock plant characteristics and yield are comparable to widely used Guardian. And science grafting onto MP29 can be planted probably about 12 feet between trees if you're looking at the field in year 4. If you're looking to fill the orchard, I guess, between the plants in year 3, it will be different. And this is just basically our data. Now, one thing that I wanted to bring to your attention at the end is that this is on the top an MP29 tree. It's July prints on MP29. As you saw, the yields of July prints are really high, and consistently trees on MP29 were smaller. So this is something that can happen. This is actually something that happened in my border trees. So it would be advisable, for example, to actually use some support system, either tie the scaffolds together to just make sure that the scaffolds stay okay, because this can happen. I had a strong storm the day before, and basically that's what happened with some scaffolds in the border trees. Another thing is that MP29 will produce these suckers right far from the tree, and it's basically just characteristic of the plant nature of the plant. Anyway, this was my presentation. I want to acknowledge my collaborators, my grad students, interns, my technician, Jeff Cook for his help, and the USDA ARA's scientists, Tom Beckman, Jen, Ted, and David Shapiro. The funder sources, the Georgia Peat Council, the Georgia Agricultural Commission, Commission for Peaches, USDA Block Grants Initiative, and the Southern CERT. And with that, these are my peach program members, and this was collecting some yield data, basically. And thank you. If you have any questions or additional questions after this, you can send me an email. And also you can visit my website or also the extension block website as well. And with that more, if you have any questions, I will be happy to try to answer them. Jeff, I cannot see any questions in here. Can you see any? It seems that there are no questions, but if you have if you want any additional information or you would like to see the plot, I will be happy to show it to you. You're welcome to visit.
Sorry, Dario, I was talking and not unmuted. I was telling you, you didn't have any questions, but you have a comment. Great work, okay. Excellent presentation. So,
okay.
So if you are in the audience and you're listening, sorry about that. I was muted and didn't know it. But you can now take some live questions. You can type your question in the question box, hit send, and we'll be able to see it. And we can respond to that. Again, don't forget to sign out of this talk by typing your first name and last name in the audience, and hitting send, and make sure to state that you're requesting credits. So we got a question. Any of the stocks, root stocks, have soil-borne disease tolerances that might be relevant?
So MP29, as I mentioned before, is resistant to armillaria root rot. Tom found now for, and again, I am just quoting a little bit, so and maybe he's quoting too, but Tom checked and I think so a second time for P22, and he found that actually falls between Guardian and MP29 for resistance or tolerance in this case. So the trees will go down, but they will stay alive for longer than a Guardian rootstock. So if you think about it, you may be able to use some like walking tree techniques or berms to help the tree basically last longer. So it's a viable option for sure. And also is resistant to floridensis as well. If you're afraid of floridensis in the case of being widely spread in different locations. I see a comment that they asked about when will or is MP29 available now through nurseries. It is basically tendency nurseries. Certain tendency nurseries are offering it. However, the availability is not widely spread. So we're hoping that basically with those the research from Tom Beckman and different people looking at MP29 will encourage nurseries basically to have a little more of that available. However, MP29 has certain constraints also for nursery propagation, so that's something that to be in mind as well.
Basically, with MP29, Dario, wouldn't you say if you want MP29, you need to work with the nursery and let them know well ahead of time?
Yeah, so I believe the timeline is basically if you want trees, for example, for 2023, you will have to basically order or talk with the nurseries this year because they have to have a 2-year cycle to produce those trees for you. There are some options that we have been actually doing research about the use of different stocks for the nursery, but it seems that option is more for locations where you have basically a little bit of a larger growing season. So we're still encouraged by the results, but we don't have a nursery that has picked up that yet.
All right, Dario, I'm not seeing any more questions and nothing more in the chat box.
Okay.
If you want to hang on and stay a little while longer, you can do that. I'm going to log off and go to my next talk.
Okay.
And, but I will say this real quick. Make sure you guys sign out by typing your first name, last name, and your state. Don't forget, there's still some shows left. There's still the trade show. And there's also the nightly networking this evening where they'll pass the gavel from the old president to Drew Eccles, who is the new president of the Georgia Fruit and Vegetable Growers Association. So with that being said, I'm going to go, and I thank you, Dario, and I thank y'all for attending the Southeastern Fruit and Vegetable Growers Conference.
Thank you.